Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation. I am the honor to present Mrs. Lone Kørnøv. She is a professor at the Department of Planning of Aalborg University. Her research area is environmental assessment, sustainability, planning and decision-making process, stakeholder engagement, as well as digitalization of decision support. In addition, she's engaged in capacity building nationally and internationally, and is one of the four turners for the Danish continuing education within environmental assessment of projects. Previously, she worked as a senior project manager in Kørnøv and ran her own consulting business with environmental assessment. Also, she is the director of Collabora. At Aalborg University, she is the head of the Danish Center for Environmental Assessment, which works closely with business authorities and private consultancy firms to build a bridge between research and practice. She has received the International Association of Impact Assessment Individual Award for sustained and significant contribution to environmental assessment in 2016, and she is the president now. She is a member of the Academy of Technical Science since 2017. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the kind invitation to join the SDEWES community. Listening to the presentations yesterday, I was struck by the wealth of knowledge, technologies, and solutions already available, even the investors. A challenge now lies in how we plan, assess, and permit in a way that keeps up with the readiness. In other words, our technological transition is running ahead of our institutional capacity. That's where environmental assessment, planning, and governance have a crucial role to make sure that readiness can translate into responsible and legitimate action. Environmental assessment is sometimes seen as a brake, slowing progress, but I will argue the opposite. When applied with purpose, environmental assessment is an enabler a bridge between speed and sustainability, helping to steer the transition in a direction that is not only fast, but fair. As a professor in the field of environmental assessment and decision-making and president of the International Association for Impact Assessment, I engage with environmental assessment in theory, in law, and practice, from Brussels directives to local permits, and I've seen both the strength and its failures. I also have the privilege of leading a strong and dedicated research team at Aalborg University, where we explore how assessments can better support sustainable decisions. As a researcher, I identify as a sustainability scientist and a systems thinker, which I will return to. I begin my introduction with introducing environmental assessment, then set the stage with the sustainable green transition, before turning to the question of whether we are fit for purpose today, and finally explore agency and change before giving illustrations of how collaborative initiatives can strengthen the transition. Many of you here work with energy technologies and systems. My perspectives comes from environmental field or environmental assessment, a field that connects these to the environments and the societies that depend on them. We share the same ambition to make the transition both faster and sustainable. Environmental assessment can be seen as a constraint, but in practice, it is a tool for risk management, optimization, and legitimacy, helping projects succeed in a complex, real-world context. In the European context, almost every key element of the green transition, from wind turbines, solar parks, PTX, CO2 capture and storage, to afforestation and wetland restoration, all falls under the scope of environmental assessment. In a sense, environmental assessment is where the green transition planning and project development meets environmental governance. So before going further, I will start with a brief introduction to what environmental assessment actually is, because it underpins nearly every major technology and infrastructure project driving the transition. At its heart, environmental assessment is about prevention, not cleaning up damage afterwards, but identifying risks early, shaping better alternatives, and avoiding harm. Timing is critical, and environmental assessment must come very early. When impacts cannot be avoided, we minimize. If that's not enough, then we repair. And finally, we can replace or compensate for an impact on our environment. Increasingly, I also see a practice among developers especially to enhance, to use their projects as an opportunity to also create positive outcomes for example, biodiversity and communities. So this is the mitigation hierarchy, and the logic is very clear. It's about prevention first. Environmental assessment is part of a broader family of impact assessments: social, health, human rights, gender, cumulative, and many more. IARA defines impact assessment as a transformative process designed to inform and guide decisions and actions by governments, business, or individuals. It aims to maximize positive outcomes while minimizing negative effects, ultimately fostering sustainable development. This wider framing reminds us that assessment is not just a technical procedure. It is a guiding process that shapes decisions and aligns them with sustainability goals and builds trust. In this keynote, I focus on the two institutionalized forms: strategic environmental assessment for plans, SEA, and environmental impact assessment for projects, EIA. They are the backbone of environmental assessment in Europe and globally. They are embedded in two EU directives and in the Espoo Convention and in its SEA protocol. This gives them a dual foundation, national and cross-boundary. The latter becoming more and more important as energy projects especially has transboundary impacts, such as offshore systems and developments. Sometimes they also include inputs from other types of assessments, like life cycle assessment, habitat assessment, or social impact assessments. They sit alongside other EU assessment regimes, we could call them, directives on water, habitats, emissions, and more. And together, you could, so to speak, say that they create a comprehensive EU framework designed to mainstream environmental sustainability into every level of decision-making. Ultimately, environmental assessment is about decision-making. Not an end in itself, it's a means to inform choices. Whether it's government setting policies, authorities planning land use or energy supply, or developers proposing projects. It stands at the fork in the road, ensuring choices are made with knowledge and not blindfolded. You may have seen a figure like this before, because environmental assessment is often shown as a formal sequence: screening, scoping, assessment, consultation, and decision. But key is also, from my point of view, really what happens before the formal process, in the preparatory stage, in dialogue, based upon baseline data, framing alternatives, finding viable locations for different projects. If that is missed, environmental assessment risk becoming reactive and contested. And this is why timing matters a lot. Decisions have the greatest weight early, yet environmental knowledge too often comes in later. So the role of environmental assessment is really to close that gap, to bring in knowledge when it really matters the most for the transition. The law is clear. Environmental assessment exists to protect the environment, to promote sustainable development, and involve the public early. So there's also a democratic aspect of environmental assessment. And it defines environment very broadly. Maybe a surprise to some of you here, that it concerns biodiversity, population, human health, flora, fauna, soil, water, air, climate, material assets, and so forth. This breadth of environmental factors calls for systems thinking, the ability to see interconnections rather than isolated issues. Without it, we risk tunnel vision. For example, we might focus narrowly on cutting CO2 while overlooking the consequences for biodiversity, water, land take, or local communities. We see this in some large renewable energy projects around the world. They achieve climate benefit, but at times also clear forest, destroy habitats, or displaces local communities. A system perspective reminds us that the planet has multiple interacting boundaries, and climate stability is one of the important ones. But overshooting others, such as biodiversity integrity or land system change, can undermine the long-term resilience. Environmental assessment helps to keep all of these dimensions in view, on the table. It is an arena where different sustainability goals meet and where trade-offs and synergies are worked out in practice. Yes. So far, I've shown environmental assessment in its own term. But of course, it does not exist in a vacuum. It is embedded in a much larger transformation, the sustainable green transition. And this is the context in which both SCA and EIA must now operate, where their role as catalyst or bottlenecks is being tested. Green transition is the shift away from fossil systems towards sustainable ways of producing, consuming, and living. But sustainable green transition reminds us it must also be socially just, ecologically balanced, and economically viable. Otherwise, we risk solving one crisis by creating another. Acceleration of renewables is obviously central, but the real challenge is, from my point of view, is not only to go faster, but to go forward in a way that is sustainable and legitimate. The transition is shaped by different kinds of forces. Of some of them that I've highlighted here. On the one hand, we have the drivers, rapid deployment of renewables, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, and regulatory reforms that aim to speed up processes. But there are also barriers. These are grid constraint, permitting hurdles, land competition, and public opposition. And then we have the safeguards. the pressures that reminds us why we're doing this in the first place. The climate crisis, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, social justice, and legitimacy. The transition emerges from these tensions. A key question from my side, and I raise that continuously for myself and for my colleagues, is how do we connect these forces so that speed does not undermine sustainability? Here I see that environmental assessment has a role to play. It helps drivers land well by integrating knowledge early before lock-in. It addresses barriers by fostering transparency and participation. And it strengthens safeguards by its horizontal reach, its very broad concept of environment, avoiding trade-offs and increasingly also connecting to the SDGs. So rather than a bottleneck, environmental assessment can serve as the bridge between speed and sustainability, helping us move forward fast, but also fair. A central question is it then fit for the transition? Can it deliver what is needed in a time of urgency, not just protection, but enabling faster and fairer energy deployment? Across member states, challenges persist. The EU is relating or discussing that we have fragmented, slow and poorly coordinated processes, weak digitalization and transparency. They also point at limited public engagement and public acceptance challenges, and that authorities are struggling with limited staff and expertise. And finally, that we are missing the spatial planning and the grid bottlenecks. And together, these factors explain to a large extent, not the whole story, but to a large extent why the transition is stalling. EU's response is to make permitting faster, smarter, and fairer. That means shorter timelines, digitalization, stronger participation, and more consistent environmental assessment procedures across the member states. This is not just talk. We have already seen that 22 countries have already introduced reforms to speed up environmental assessment to support the green transition. So there is a structural shift across Europe. Especially faster procedures, easier grid connections, better planning through pre-zoned renewable areas, and early dialogue with citizens. And these simplifications initiatives can accelerate and they can improve practice and help us to meet the goals that we have for 2030 and beyond. But simplification is a loaded word. It's definitely high on the political agenda. It can bring us closer to the objectives of environmental assessment and objectives of sustainability, but it can also move us further away. Yes, it means different things. And from my point of view, it's really to distinguish between good simplification that creates efficiency and quality, and bad simplification that undermines protection and participation of citizens. To make sense of this, we have developed this simplification triangle, very simple, but it illustrates different dimensions of simplification, what we can do to accelerate or to support the acceleration. We have regulatory simplification, meaning we can make changes in law, for example. Administrative simplification with shorter processes, one-stop shops, and praxis simplification with better practice, smarter methods and data, digitalization, and also outlining that how justification for simplifications comes from 3 different reasons: efficiency, quality, and reduced complexity. But each comes also with a risk, or with risk that we need to be aware of. Oversimplification, to speed up the acceleration, can also reduce scrutiny. It can limit public input. It can also weaken protection and increase risk for people and nature. The task is to simplify in a way that brings us closer to sustainability, not further away. So, is environmental assessment, as we see it across not just Europe, but globally, really fit for the transition? Yes, I think it is, if it adapts. Yes, if it simplifies smartly, not thinly. And yes, if it keeps its core role as a safeguard and a bridge. But fitness is not just about tools and instruments and processes. It's also about people, and it's about agency. And the environmental assessment related to all the technologies and the energy systems that we're discussing these days, it's not done in isolation. It's a process that is shaped by many actors. Authorities set the legal framework and make overall planning for example, land use and energy systems. Developers prepare transition projects and provide documentations. Experts and consultants carry out studies and analysis. The public, NGOs, and local communities, they contribute with perspectives, values, and local knowledge. And politicians ultimately weigh the evidence and decide. And together, these actors make environmental assessment both a technical and a democratic process, one that depends on collaboration, transparency, and trust. Colleagues and me, we have compared environmental assessment in the transition to a bicycle, and the entire Tour de France race to the effort to create change. Although optimizing the bike is important, it is only one of many parameters that are decisive for the cyclist's success. An excellent bike cannot make everyone win a stage or the Tour for that sake. So we really need to look beyond these instruments, procedures, tools, to understand what makes a difference to a cyclist's success. Like the bicycle, environmental assessment is very dependent on how people use it. So it's therefore also about the many different actors who play a role, and the success depends on how it's used and the team behind. I see environmental assessment as a facilitating agent of change, and that's also how I use it in practice in my collaboration with developers and authorities. But I also know that it only comes alive when people act within it. Change does not just happen. Change requires agents. Following Ottaway's taxonomy that I've presented here, we need both generators, we need implementers, we need adopters. All equal, all essential for change to happen, and in this specific case, for the sustainable green transition to accelerate. Yet, in practice, strategies often decouple. Consultants following contracts, developers chasing the best and cheapest piece of land for new projects, researchers occupied with publishing articles and boosting our H index, bureaucrats occupied with developing new regulation in an ever-shifting political landscape, and so forth. Despite the overly simplification, which I apologize for, there may be some truth to it. We need to connect because agency is collective. I will share 3 cases to illustrate this from my own experience. And they are only cases. I'm sure there is so many more examples in this room showing how collaborative efforts is such an important element of accelerating the sustainable green transition. I'll keep to these 3 because I know them the best. And together they illustrate digital transformation, capacity building, and guidance initiative, each with the aim of contributing to the sustainable green energy transition. The first one concerns digital transformation. Aalborg University, along with 14 other partners, including infrastructure developers, authorities, consultants, and researchers, we collaborated for 3 years to transform the way that society access and communicates impacts on the environment in order to enable the best decisions towards green transition. Also to support transparency and an inclusive democratic process. It was a project where outputs were mainly digital tools and guidance to practitioners, to authorities, developers, and consultants. The 2 digital tools that I will dwell with a little bit are the Environmental Assessment Hub, which is a national repository of documents, and the Environmental Assessment Tool, which is a one-stop shop GIS platform targeting planning and environmental assessment. The found impact of these tools has been acceleration of the green transition through significant time savings in the permitting process and in the environmental assessment process, and economic savings for both authorities and for developers. Both tools are open source and are now widely used in practice, and operation is supported through the national finance law. And the ministry responsible for environmental assessment have drafted regulation that mandates the use of the Environmental Assessment Hub, just to illustrate that there is a belief that that digitization can support our national, international policies and objectives. Just to give you a glimpse of the hub, it contains over 2,600 reports at the moment with structured metadata and georeferenced content, legal decisions of relevance for the transition. It has different search functionalities, and it includes AI-enabled semantic search. Not generating new content, but the hub is making knowledge significantly more accessible, traceable, and useful for planning and for project development. The other tool, the EA tool, that includes more than 700 curated data sets, helping to make fast and targeted environmental screenings on land and in the marine environment. This is a domain-specific digitalization, and it is becoming important infrastructure for planning and localization of green projects and for project development, for environmental assessment and permitting. The tools and the progress we have made so far is now foundation for 2 further digital initiatives. Firstly, at the university, we are now exploring the building of AI agents and multi-agent systems on top to increase speed and quality related to the processes and project development. Secondly, in 3 weeks from now, we start a 3-year EU project on sustainable offshore wind farms, including building cross-boundary data spaces for planning and design for both fixed bottom and floating solutions. If we succeed with these projects, this will be a further digital transformation to support the transition. So hopefully I can come back and share with you next year or the year after. The second case I will share is about capacity building, because even the best tools, the best regulations depend on people with the right competence, confidence, and connections. Skills are critical for the green transition. According to an EU study, EU needs 2.1 million people, more people, working in the transition-related decision-making processes if we are to succeed with the transition goals 2030. Currently, we're around 1.7 million on EU level. We're at 1.7 now, and we need 2.1 more, just related to the processes, if we're going to achieve the 2030 targets. That's food for thought. And a significant challenge it is across all member states, as shown here with limited initiative across countries. So we all need to also explore the education of more people, but also to increase the competence for those already working in the field, if we should succeed with the 2030 objectives. Within that context, Aalborg University run 2 continuing education programs, one in assessment for planning and one for project development, with participants from authorities, consultants, and energy developers. The courses are co-taught by researchers and practitioners, so we bridge theory and practice in real time. We see that the mix creates a strong learning community, one where actors qualify each other, where trust grows, and where participants return to their organization as more reflective and capable transition leaders. These are supported by our annual conference, the Environmental Assessment Day, which was initiated back in 2010, and now has become a national meeting place, this year gathering more than 400 professionals. It is a space where ideas are tested, methods evolve, and networks expand across the different actors involved in the transition process. Our experience is that this collaborative competence development is having valuable impact. Research and practice inspire, we qualify each other, community and shared meaning is built across authorities, energy, developers and consultants, trust and network expands, and practice evolves. And together these efforts are building not just competence, but actually capacity and community, and strengthen the backbone of planning and assessment. The last case I will share with you, because it has a different angle to how we can support the transition, and that concerns professional leadership and shared standard. While digitalization builds our tool, capacity building strengthens our people, we also need a shared compass, a collective understanding of what good practice mean in time of rapid change. The good news is that transition away from fossil fuels is happening now. Renewable projects are expanding rapidly across the globe. The challenge is, though, that many authorities are struggling to manage this influx, project by project approval, which risk becoming fragmented and short-sighted. This is where professional leadership matters. The new SEA guidance from the International Association for Impact Assessment provides exactly that shared compass. It focuses on the strategic level, helping governments and planners make sound choices before projects reach the permitting stage. By integrating environmental and social considerations early, the assessment can help shape sustainable energy planning instead of reacting to impacts later. The guidance brings together experts from research, practice, and policy to show how strategic environmental assessment can be used proactively to align energy development with sustainability goals. It is an act of collective agency, setting directions, coherence, and confidence for assessment globally. And I must say, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I am proud because this step has been taken. It demonstrates how collaboration and shared leadership can strengthen practice worldwide, ensuring that we not just accelerate, but we also stay on course. So, what do these 3 cases tell us when we step back? They are not isolated initiatives, but they are 3 expressions of agency that together makes us more fit for the transition. Digital transformation strengthens tools and infrastructure, making planning and assessment faster, more transparent, and better connected. Capacity building strengthens our people and relationships. It builds competence, trust, and shared meaning across authorities, consultants, and developers. And professional leadership through initiatives like the IIA SEA guidance strengthen our shared compass, giving direction and coherence in a time of rapid change. And together, these examples show that the future does not lie in one reform or one innovation, but in the interplay between technology, people, and institutions. This is how we can build collective capacity and how the assessments can continue to serve as an enabling framework for sustainable and legitimate transformation. And with that perspective, let me end with reflections on what it takes, individually and collectively, to strengthen us, our tools, our processes, a catalyst for change. In order to stay relevant and fit, I see the following needs and challenges as central. First of all, we need to decide to be relevant and a change agent and take the leadership. And that is that whether we are a researcher, a policymaker, a developer, or a practitioner. And it's also about simplifying wisely for the acceleration to support sustainable acceleration of renewables, recognizing the interlinkages between climate, biodiversity, land use, and communities, and promote solutions that work across these boundaries rather than shifting burdens elsewhere. And about critically embracing new technologies like artificial intelligence and reflect on our own agency and who the other change agents are that we engage with. And finally, foster collaboration. The field that I'm working with, environmental assessment, it is about prevention, participation, and trust. And I see it as not the only, but one of the important bridges between urgency and responsibility. Done right, it can be a catalyst for sustainable energy transition. With these words, I will finalize my presentation. Thank you for your very kind attention. And I welcome any questions, reflections, and comments. Thank you. And I hope we have time for questions. That was my intention, at least. Yes, please.
One question that interests me very much is what about vested interests hijacking the process? So once upon a time, I did analysis of how many publications we have about birds killed by wind turbines compared to birds killed with pesticides and chemical poisons on the field. And it came out in a quick calculation that it's about 10,000 times per bird more on the birds killed by wind turbines. Nobody cares about poor birds killed by chemical poisons. Why is that so?
The latter I can't answer, but the first part I can reflect upon, because you're completely right. That these processes, they can easily become contested because it is also complex. And it, like with this broad concept of environment, it requires a system thinking. And we're not system thinkers per se, any of us. It's something that is hard for the human brain to encompass. And then, of course, you have in these processes, there are many different actors. But I would say from my own experience working with developers and authorities, I have seen some very good examples of developers and authorities taking responsibility and making an effort to have a system thinking and they are the one that have succeeded. I also see, and mainly from the Danish context, I also see a lot of projects these days that are either withdrawn or have to be delimited in size significantly. One, like just, was it last week or a few weeks ago, one of the biggest energy parks in Denmark, the biggest plant in Denmark, now they have shrunk the development to, with 94%. 94%. It was like this big project. They've invested years in it, assessments and so on. But they did the wrong thing because they were not proactive, having a system thinking, engaging with the communities and finding a good location. And I see many, unfortunately, renewable energy projects failing due to the lack of system thinking and lack of creating legitimacy in these processes. That was a long answer, but I hope it was, I'm totally aware. And you'll see that everywhere, that there are different interests. Yes?
Goran Krajic, University of Zagreb. Thank you for your presentation. Metaphorically speaking, maybe we are in a situation that patient is dying and the doctor needs to decide to cut the leg. So if planet is dying and we need to maybe cut some of this many of factors or things that you mentioned, like landscape or something, you know, we need to sacrifice it. So are you aware of the tools or methods or processes that can help us to decide, you know, if we need to cut, where to cut, or how to cut? And that's the question. Okay, thanks.
I won't say I know a tool, but I know processes where it can happen. Because you, again, it's also, first of all, you can say, like, we can't do anything without it having impact. That's like, that is the basis. But impacts are not necessarily significant in a society. So it's also depending on where you are. Are you in your country, in my country, in which part of the country? So it will always be a determination of the significance of impact, because there will always be impact. But I would say the tool is, from my own experience, that is the negotiation between the political level and the society and the communities. You won't find a tool that can make that decision for you, because it will always be a balancing act and a political decision at the end. What is it we prioritize and what is it we sacrifice? But we can always, by being proactive, do the job as good as we can, and as the mitigation hierarchy I showed, try to prevent. And if that's not possible, let's try to reduce it. And we can do that in a smart and legitimate way, I would say. But no simple tools. It is challenging. Yes, there was also a question here.
Gordon Andrews, Leeds University. Related to the first question, really, I've been involved in hydrogen for decarbonisation of heat. So I've been developing gas fires, central heating systems, industrial burners. I was invited to talk. There was going to be in the UK village trials of hydrogen prior to hydrogen going into the grid. And I had to go and speak to villagers about why hydrogen, why it was safe. And what I found was that people in there been telling them basically lies about hydrogen, in the same way lies about birds being killed by wind farms, and they would not see reason. And that there was a big centre built for the villagers to go and see hydrogen equipment. They could go and cook on a hydrogen cooker. And yet in the end, the government bowed to public opposition and the trials didn't go ahead. Now, somewhere in the Netherlands, the opposite, that they've had positive village trials. I'm not sure whether Denmark has, but I'm not sure what the UK did that was different, other than that there was organised opposition.
Yes. very interesting perspectives. Just a few notes to it. As you say, like we're also in a time with fake information and misleading information. So that is also part of our reality now. That is one part. And yes, opposition grows. I also see that in many cases. And I also see that the public is much more competent today in organizing opposition. And how do we deal with that? Because I think that is also a positive thing on the one hand side. Again, from my own experience, I always put transparency first, as early as possible, because we know from research, if there is the slightest mistake of information, knowledge being withdrawn, not put forward, mistrust is increasing exponential. What is? Yeah, you get my point here. So transparency, put all we know out to the public and engage in that dialogue. But if we come too late, then it can really create problems. I was just in June, I was leading a big public meeting for wind turbines because the conflict level was so high, so they had to bring in one from outside. We managed to go through without anyone being hit, which was actually at risk. And I'm sure that one of the reasons for it was that the authority and the developer had their internal process for too long. And the local community was excluded from that process. They were included too late. And the trust in the developer and the authorities was very limited. And then you see the opposition. Yeah, I don't know if that was an answer, but it's complex. There are many aspects to it. But the early engagement as possible, be transparent as much as we can, and listen. The project that I mentioned that was descaled with 94%. That is significant. I think that's just an illustration of what happens if we are not engaging early in a transparent way with legitimate interests. Yes? Other questions or comments? There's one down there.
I'm Will from EPFL. Thank you for your nice presentation. I have one question regarding the tool. How to build or maintain the database for the tool? Do you have any criteria for selecting the data? Thank you.
Can I get that question again? Because I didn't hear it all. Sorry.
It's related to the database. To the database for the tool.
Sorry, it's these old years. Yes, it's that was a key point for me. I was the project leading that project. That it had to be open source, and you can access it. And actually, we have also it's both in Danish and in English. And the algorithm, like the structure that is built, is also one that the Danish Environmental Portal that is hosting the databases, that they can share with you, with any government interested in it. Because we need to, it's also, I'm emphasizing collaboration, and that is also cross-border. We don't have time. We need to share as much as possible and be as open to share our results, our algorithms, our data, because that is needed. So it's there, it's open source, and you're very welcome if you're interested to approach me, and I can put you in contact with the portal hosting it. Yes? Thank you for showing the interest in it. I advertise it because I would love everyone else to have databases that are open source.
Albana Kona from Joint Research Center. Thank you very much, Professor, for this interesting presentation. I would like to know what is your opinion on the revised Renewable Energy Directive? I think there is quite advancement in the environmental impacts of energy projects that are concentrated in some parts of the city that will get faster permission in terms of environmental standards. And another reflection on this point, it seems to me that the recast of the Renewable Directive prioritizes centralized production. While here with renewables, we're dealing very much with distributed energy. So do you think there should be a recast, a new recast of the directive that takes into account the size and the distribution of the sources? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. For the first one, I think there are really positive progress when it comes to the EU regulation and to the revision of the Renewable Directive. Absolutely. I doubt that that is enough when I see what is happening in different member states. But it's a positive progress. And again, it's within this discourse that I'm also presenting here about moving faster, but also wisely. So definitely progress, but not enough. That's what we have seen. Then for the second part, I'll say like generally, because it goes so fast now, the acceleration is here, that the need for revisiting our regulation has to increase. And I think what we have seen from the EU is that the EU is capable of also revisiting and making new regulation fast to accommodate the need that we have now. And I see that that is only increasing. But regulation, again, it's one important part. But it's also how we fulfill the objectives of the regulation that is important. And then we're back to all the different actors playing each their role and the interdependency between actors. Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure about the time. I hope that Susanna here is in charge of that, so we're not keeping you away from the lunch.
No more questions, so we acknowledge. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for the invitation.